welcome to the webinar. Thank you very, very much for joining us. My name is Eleanor Deering, and I'm delighted to be hosting this session on how to set up a successful quality engineering framework for Salesforce. Please ask as many questions as you would like. Please use the Q&A function. I will keep monitoring that while our excellent speakers are giving their presentation, and then at the end we do have time for Q&A. So yes, please ask as many questions as you like. We'd love to have lots and lots of questions to throw at these chaps later. So a little bit about me. I've been working in the Salesforce ecosystem for the last 15 years, and in that time there have been so many changes in how things are done within projects and implementations. And for me, one of the most brilliant changes has been the sort of shift in attitude towards quality throughout a delivery, and the recognition for the need for continuous quality engineering throughout the development process, so that everything's not just squeezed into that final week before go live. Let me introduce our speakers. So we have Will Hughes joining us today from Provar, and Nachiket Jeurkar from Exavalu, who are one of our trusted implementation partners, and they'll be taking us through the following slides. So with no further ado, over to you, chaps.
So a little bit about myself. My name is Nachiket Jeurkar. I go by Nachi, and I head, among other things, the consulting and advisory practice at Exavalu. And as Ella mentioned, we are partners with Provar, and we do a lot of work together. As far as Salesforce goes, I've been in the part of the Salesforce ecosystem for the last 10, probably more years. Have led and participated in many large and small programs, some truly gargantuan, and have had to pick up a lot about testing and test automation along the way, just because of the size and complexity of some programs that I've been involved in. So looking forward to this webinar and sharing some of the insights, and looking forward to your questions as well. Will?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Will Hughes. I'm an account executive here at Provar, and I've been in the automation space for about 7 years or so now. I found it really interesting to see how automation kind of fits into the Salesforce ecosystem. So over the past 3-4 years at Provar, I've been working with loads of different customers who have been starting this journey of developing test automation frameworks, and that's all centered around Salesforce. So really looking forward to sharing some of those success stories, as well as some of the challenges that they've had to overcome. And as Ella said, yeah, please ask questions. We'll be answering them all at the end in the Q&A.
We'll just take a look quickly at the structure of this webinar. We've got quite a few things to cover, somewhat ambitious table of contents here. So we'll start with setting the stage, the complexities of large Salesforce ecosystems. I'm sure many of you will find them familiar. What are the typical challenges, that we have seen our customers face, and then how does one ensure quality by addressing these challenges? Then we take you through a somewhat structured 6-step process to build out a test automation strategy and platform, and then talk about how a single view, meaning a holistic view of quality, is enabled. We're going to be talking about why test automation, what are some of the complexities associated with the automation in a Salesforce context. And then we'll take a very quick look at what an end-to-end CI/CD pipeline could look like, enabled with, among other things, test automation. And then, as Ella mentioned, we have some time at the end for Q&A. Some of these are not necessarily just relevant for Salesforce programs or applications, but I'm sure some of you'll find some of these familiar, right? So to begin with, one of the complexities that you don't see with other platforms that may be custom developed is the number of large and small releases that Salesforce, which is extremely innovative and active company, keeps pushing down the pipe, which you have to address, and you got to factor those into your release calendar. So that's one of the that's definitely specific to Salesforce and perhaps other COTS applications. Another aspect that we have seen, and you might find it familiar too, is that often large enterprises prefer to have multiple user groups in the same org. This might be for license optimization, for support optimization, but it does introduce a certain complexity because some of these groups, because these user groups often have very different functionalities and requirements, and they may also have different product groups. So that brings us to the third point, which is that you may have multiple parallel streams of development happening, and you've got to make sure that those don't step on each other and break some other user group's functionality. Also, now this one is not typical, not just confined to Salesforce, but you will have a two-track development situation where you have a small team that's working on any production-related hot fixes, and then there's ongoing major changes. So you've got to make sure that hot fixes don't break the major changes, and vice versa, the major changes don't overturn the fixes that you put in. This is a common situation to any large enterprise platform. Something that's, again, somewhat specific to Salesforce is that because it's such a large, flexible and powerful platform, most customers end up putting in a lot of customization, and therefore the testing is necessarily quite complicated. And finally, and the last 2 points, again, are not so specific to Salesforce, but certainly characteristic of large Salesforce applications. You'll find no Salesforce application exists by itself. It's almost inevitably integrated with many other systems, and therefore end-to-end testing is complex. And because people are used, your user groups are demanding, and the platform is so flexible, there's constant pressure to introduce new functionalities faster, which again squeezes the time available for testing.
Thanks for that, Nachi. So, I mean, great overview of all those intricacies of navigating these large and complex Salesforce ecosystems. I think we can shifting gears and looking at these common challenges. They're really important. It's really important to understand those hurdles, especially when designing the framework, the tested frameworks, not just so that it's an effective framework, but also so it's practical in those real world scenarios. So starting with that first point, being Salesforce major updates, these are obviously a fantastic way for them to drive innovation on the platform, but they can also cause a lot of disruption, especially in the context of testing and test automation frameworks. Those customizations, integrations, workflows, all of that is going to need constant adjustment so you can keep up. And that impact on test automation is very prevalent, especially when for example, we at Provar do a lot of tracking when it comes to the changes that Salesforce are pushing out for good reason, and I'll come back onto that point a little later. But for example, the number of changes to the DOM structure that Salesforce made between summer 22 and winter 24 releases was over 50, which is a lot. It's a lot for teams, especially who are trying to maintain a test automation framework to accommodate for. And what it really means is that a lot of test automation frameworks and automation suites, they're going to break due to those changes. And what does that lead to? That leads to a lot of maintenance work. And we also have some kind of more real world context on that. We've had customers that pre-release, they've had large regression suites working 100% of the tests are passing successfully. Post-release, one customer in particular saw 60% of their test cases failing. And obviously, usually that would mean a load of rework, a lot of time spent, days, potentially even weeks. But coming on to the kind of benefits of Provar, something we do is we align our releases to those Salesforce releases so that we provide that kind of self-healing, those updates for the customer, and they don't have to spend time doing that maintenance work. And then just finally, you can see, in that example, introducing new features like dynamic forms and things like that. that can significantly increase the complexity, especially if you need to kind of test across different layouts, profiles, and things like that. So that's just one example.
Another common situation is that as applications mature, you tend to overload certain objects, flows, and triggers. We certainly have seen our share of that, and therefore it's difficult to predict and build test cases around what the expected outcome is. So one of our clients, for example, has had have so many flows and triggers built on specific fields that it's difficult to build test cases because there wasn't enough documentation. In fact, there wasn't even enough knowledge of it to do some reverse engineering. This isn't necessarily a Salesforce specific issue, but it definitely is exacerbated because of the different ways in which you can build logic within Salesforce. There's so many options. People make different choices. If you haven't, and over time, there's the complexity only increases.
Yeah, and speaking of complexity, another big challenge to jump in on the third point there, highly customized Salesforce orgs, can be obviously a huge benefit of having Salesforce. That's why, a lot of customers choose Salesforce so they can do that. But it also can become a huge pain. And when you think about those customizations, whether they could be, Apex code, different custom objects, triggers, third-party integrations, things like that customers tailor Salesforce to suit their needs. All of that complexity does make testing a lot harder. So kind of on one hand, those customizations, it could mean that for an automated test framework or solution, it needs to be able to handle those custom built components. And, knowing kind of all the tools and where automation has come from in the space, a lot of the time those automation tools could struggle with those custom built components. And on the other hand, we can often also see, highly custom and complex integrations. So, the example that we've shared there is, with a client that's integrating with a payment gateway. And not only does that need a lot of testing, there's a lot of complexity around that, different profiles, different routes through the payment gateway, different rules that you need to adhere to for validation. It also becomes highly critical from that security and compliance perspective. And it's not just, for the financial services industry. Those complexities with customization can span across many different verticals, and we do see that. So it's important that you have, a solution and a framework that's built to kind of handle those highly customized orgs and configurations.
The final one on this list, not necessarily the last challenge, is obviously Salesforce is incredibly flexible when it comes to privileges and access. RBAC is something everyone who's worked on Salesforce would be familiar with. This obviously introduces its own complexity when it comes to automation testing, even manual testing for that matter. Certainly, you all must have seen situations where users report errors, and it's only because across environments, the permissions and the roles haven't been set up accurately. So that's something that I think you'll relate to. We've done a pretty good job of talking about the challenges. So I hope we haven't scared people off. But it is possible, and we have actually implemented a full-blown quality engineering framework even in the face of these challenges. And from our experience, there's sort of four aspects that you need to keep in mind. One is to begin with, you got to have a focus on the you've got to have a focus on testing the business functionality. That should be front and center, because often the people who are doing the automation and even writing the test cases can be at a remove from the business objectives. And it doesn't help anyone if you've tested the application, it's cleared, but it's not achieving the functionality. So you've got to have the test cases written and validated with business users. Again, this is not just Salesforce specific, but certainly needs to be in place for Salesforce too. Second is because Salesforce as a platform has so many different components, you've got to have a multi-layered automation strategy. So you're addressing not just the UI. Of course, within that you may have multiple flavors of the UI with LWCs and Classic. And then got to make sure you also test the APIs. As we said, most large ecosystems are highly integrated, and then and the role-based access controls, again, something we alluded to. So you got to, from the outset, have a strategy that addresses this. So we call it shift right and shift left, but I'll primarily focus on the shift left part of it, which is you got to make sure that business users and your BAs and analysts and even your developers are involved in confirming and validating the test cases that you're going to automate. The last thing you need is to go all the way down the road and to create an automated test case, report a defect, and then find out that the test case wasn't written correctly. You wasted everybody's time. So by having business users or SMEs confirm and validate your test cases early in the process, you're making sure that the quality, not just automated, but overall quality is maintained. And then once all of these are in place, you got to start with start integrating these into the CI/CD pipeline so that the throughput, the speed at which you introduce changes is increased, which is the ultimate objective really of every development team. Those were the guiding principles. How does one go about putting in place a test automation platform? So we'll start with an assessment. So as we said, you've got to make sure that the core of your testing is focused on business objectives. So you've got to identify what are your core business processes, what are the expected outcomes, and build your test cases around that. Consider what unique customizations you might have. You might have Apex products in your environment. You might have custom UI built out. So you got to make sure, and of course integrations. So consider what you're going to be testing. And then with that in mind, look for the right tool. Obviously, there is a tool that we are talking in the context of, but there are others as well. One common debate we've seen at enterprise customers is that there's usually an enterprise or test automation suite in place. And there's often a debate between choosing something that's sort of horizontal, that can be used for a variety of platforms and technologies, versus something that is more focused on specific platforms. But I would argue that the efficiency that you gain with using a focused platform is often, especially if you have a large Salesforce footprint, is often worth that change from the enterprise direction. Besides which, in most cases, the specialized platform can do everything that the horizontal platform can do. So there isn't really much of a trade-off. Then very important and not an easy problem to solve is your test environment and data management. So you've got to decide what you're going to test where. That's really the nub of test environment planning. So once you've decided that, then you need to know, you need to figure out how you're going to get the right amount of data in those environments for you to successfully execute those test cases. So planning for the environment and the data in the environment is, I'm sure everybody who's worked in Salesforce has struggled with these. There are a variety of approaches. It's better to identify those approaches upfront than to sort of stumble on them as you build out your test automation. So you can do, some of those approaches are listed there, like partial copy sandboxes, using generative AI. That's something that's new, and where we as Exavalu have developed some assets. So you can create synthetic data that looks like your data. It isn't just a dumb copy, but it's actually a variety of records that look a lot like your existing data set. And then ensure that the test execution has scenario specific data. You're going to have an approach to modularize your test cases, because with large and complex applications, you not want to do end-to-end testing, but the way to do that is to build modular test cases and then string them together to create end-to-end scenarios. So it definitely takes some thought and planning. You got to decide what you are going to look at, what are you going to monitor and track, and then building the instrumentation so that you're reporting those correctly, and then have a dashboard, or you have the infrastructure in place to analyze and report on that data. This will probably be at the end of your journey, but you got to have a plan to integrate these automated test cases into your CI/CD pipeline, so that eventually your throughput increases, as I mentioned earlier.
Just to add a quick point onto some of those, because I think it's really relevant to some of the conversations that we have at Provar with our customers, especially around the customers that have that strategic view when coming into these conversations. A lot of that is around scaling, and so some of the points that I would kind of highlight on this slide really is that modularization of test cases. We talk a lot, and we've done a lot of trials, POCs, where in terms of best practice, that really is a key cornerstone of starting with those best practices, and that is all around reusability of test cases, being able to easily take a test case and copy it over a number of different end-to-end test cases, so you're not having to duplicate that work. And when you start to scale your automation framework and approach, it's really important that these strategies are adhered to across the team. The only other one I'll point out is around reporting, because if you're looking at that strategic view, often we focus so much on the actual building of test cases, and often in the right way, using best practices. What's also so important from that strategic level is making sure that everyone outside of that, the quality assurance, quality engineering teams and development teams, have a clear view of what's happening associated with your QA practices. So at Provar, we've got solutions to cater for that, where you can visualize your test results and dashboards and reports, and I'll go into a bit of that more detail on that later. But having that view, and also the traceability of what you've been testing, is really important in order to actually improve what's happening within your Salesforce orgs. So there are some of the really key things that do come up a lot in conversations with customers, and definitely are areas of focus that we try and adhere to from the very start of the conversations around building frameworks like this.
And here's a sort of a quick summary or a recap of what your test strategy or test approach should look like. We call it the 3I framework. Basically, it should be integrated, intelligent, and inclusive. What do you mean with that? Integrated, as we said, we've got to involve testing teams from the outset. Actually, I would argue that it should, when we say testing, it also includes SMEs and business analysts, so that they can make sure that the test cases reflect the actual business functionality. It should be intelligent in the sense that while you might build out a very comprehensive test bed, and executing those test cases may seem everything all the time may seem very attractive. It does not often play out because there's there may be false negatives, defects reported. There's obviously a time overhead associated with executing all those test cases. So you've got to have a framework which can identify what needs to be tested for each release, so that you can intelligently execute just the right set of tests. And then inclusive, as I mentioned in the integrated point, the test script should be enabled across the team. The development team during unit testing should be able to use some of your automated tests. Business users during UAT should be able to use it for validating if you're caught up on the releases, and definitely during regression as everybody sort of immediately assumes. So integrated, intelligent, inclusive, the 3 I's you keep in mind when putting a framework together.
And so now I'm going to talk about, so why test automation, for Salesforce in particular is so complex. And it's something that I speak about a lot with, different customers, because especially if you're coming to the tooling that you're going to use, or, at a more generic sense, the approach you're going to take to testing Salesforce, it's really important to understand these fundamentals because it's so complex. And so for starters, things, something like Salesforce's deep and complicated DOM structure is something that, from a technical perspective, can throw up some huge challenges and huge barriers to typical automation solutions. It makes it really difficult to create tests that are both reliable and easy to maintain. So when thinking about the DOM, you have components that have dynamic IDs, things that change constantly, on each time the page is loading. So if you think about developing an automation test case for that, each time the test case run, is it going to be seeing something different each time? So how do you then make that a reliable test case that you don't have to keep on maintaining? One of the ways that Provar does it is by using the metadata, and it's something that we speak about a lot. But what it really comes down to is having an understanding of those complexities so that whatever solution you're using can overcome those. And it also applies for things like varying wait times, that for anyone that's been using Salesforce for a while, you'll know that different pages load at different times, and you can really have some quite kind of low performing pages where things just take a while to load, and it depends on how that page is built and things like that. So when thinking about the test automation side of things, you can't just build in a static wait time necessarily. You might need something a bit more dynamic. But what you really need is the understanding of the fact that wait times can be different depending on the different pages, and then build that into your automated tests. And Nachi's mentioned it a few times so far, but there's also the role and permission-based testing, which for Salesforce is it's it's fairly unique. Salesforce has that real granular access controls, and so testing needs to ensure that users can basically see only what they're supposed to and nothing else. It has to properly test those things, because when it comes to Salesforce and different Salesforce users and having control across your organization, it's really important to ensure those are adhered to. There could be things like data being shown to the wrong people or ending up in the wrong location. And in these cases, it can get really critical. And on top of that, you have the long end-to-end test scenarios. So we know that Salesforce, it's not an island. It is integrated across all customers with many different applications. You can go against different objects, workflows, and all of that adds a lot of complexity. So again, coming to the solution, coming to the approach you take, it's important to build your automation framework and have an automation solution that's able to easily kind of go between those different applications if you're working in an end-to-end test scenario. And then kind of finally, Salesforce also obviously has the kind of challenge, but it's also a benefit of managing multiple environments across one implementation. You might have customers with 5 orgs with multiple environments. It can really start stacking up. And each of those Salesforce instances can have different configurations, different data sets, and that makes consistency a real struggle. But what we care about at the end is quality in production. It's actually having a high quality production org. And so then thinking about testing, you need a solution that is able to ensure that consistency across those different environments. And what Provar can do is you can switch easily between environments. You can write one test and run it against all those different environments. And that's the kind of functionality that helps you to scale that kind of automation test framework. And then so on the final point, it's really important to choose the right tool. And it is something that we speak about a lot at Provar. And it's important that, our customers, whether they are customers now or might be customers in the future, it's really important that they understand those. And the fact that Provar is designed to handle these complexities. And then obviously at a more high level, strategic level, that automation framework still needs to accommodate and understand these challenges so that you can set the right kind of aspects of that framework up.
At the end, all of this comes together in the form of a continuous CI/CD pipeline. In here, what we're seeing is a very high-level picture. So this is a whole subject by itself, but what we are proposing here is a model for a CI/CD pipeline where multiple developers are committing to the dev sandbox, which automatically executing the Apex test classes, then in turn doing a code merge and testing the functionality in a QA environment. So you'll see the points we made about the test environments being illustrated here. These are environments that everybody should be familiar with when you're working in the Salesforce ecosystem. The kinds of tests that you're executing are also indicated there. So in the QA, you're running a smoke test, which is to confirm that your basic functionality is working. Your happy path works, and then you do a larger regression test, and that regression test again can be sort of expanded version of the smoke test where you have all your code capabilities being tested out, or it can be really specific, where you test out some extended scenarios based on your knowledge of what has been touched. So, if you made a change to a certain object, you want to test more test cases around that object just to make sure that nothing is inadvertently broken. You move into the UAT sandbox where you're doing your more complex end-to-end test cases where you might be going outside of the applications through your integrations and then testing out the return loops as well. And then you move the code into production. And then those little symbols on there which show the Provar logo will kind of talk about how Provar can help in this pipeline.
So I did have added on these little Provar logos on there, and I won't go into too much detail. And it'll be great to hear your questions around this. But CI/CD and integration with CI/CD pipelines comes up in all our conversations. I know that when starting to develop that test automation framework, continuous testing and integration with CI/CD is always a huge part of that, and that's always front and center of a lot of people's minds, and rightly so. Provar can integrate with any CI/CD tool. I've seen so many customers with so many different tools out there, and it's really important that we can be flexible. But what that really means when it comes to when you do that integration is you can start to run Provar test, and like I put there, at each stage in your development process. And what it really comes back around to is the concept that actually mentioned earlier of shift left testing. What we want to do is to be able to test more frequently and earlier on in the release process. There's been a lot of research done, and I think on how much a bug costs to fix when it reaches production versus when it's earlier on in development process. Last I checked, it was about 30 times the cost when it reaches production. So the overall game here is to make sure that you have those tests running regularly, whether they are, whether in Provar we can trigger the Apex unit tests with Provar Manager. We can develop smaller kind of smoke sanity tests that you can run in your QA sandbox. And then you can obviously, a lot of the goal is to build those end-to-end user journeys, those test scenarios that cover your most complex functionality in your kind of higher environments. But what we're really trying to do is just test often and in each stage. So you have that continuous feedback loop into your development teams, into your operations teams, so that you can catch bugs early and fix them early. Essentially, making sure that the production instance of your Salesforce org is as high as quality as it possibly can be, and you're catching everything so it doesn't cost you too much later on in the process.
Thank you both very, very much indeed for taking us through that presentation. I was nodding along quite regularly, thinking, yes, I recognize that. Particularly the roles, profiles, permission sets. I have horrible, traumatic memories of being awake until some ungodly time in the morning, comparing roles, profiles, permission sets across environments and sandboxes. Awful. Never want to do that manually again. So thank you very much, everybody. We're going to move on to questions in a minute, but before we do, I just wanted to make sure that everybody has got access to the contact details for our fabulous speakers today. So Nachi's email address and LinkedIn is on the right of the screen, and Will is on the left. And then we've also got some links there to enable you to get in touch and do some more. Do some follow-up if you would like to do so. So we've had a number of questions. We have a couple that I hope are going to be quite tricky to answer, so that'll be good. Will, I think this one is going to be for you. So this one is, how does Provar support real-time feedback during the continuous testing process?
I guess it's building on what I last spoke about. Yeah. But it's, I guess, diving a bit more into that reporting aspect and how we actually achieve that. So, with something like, with a solution like Provar, we basically offer a lot of different options. You have your more basic reporting in PDF reports, where you can kind of track and you can configure to show the exact outputs of your individual test. And we've got built-in functionality that allows those reports to be notified. It's important when you're starting an automation framework or approach to set that up very early on, so that you're having that feedback early. But when you're then integrating with CI/CD pipelines, you can go a step further as well. And this is where I will plug Provar Manager. It's our App Exchange product, quality lifecycle management solution. And it's built on Salesforce. It's on the App Exchange, where you can go and see it. And one of the things that I like best about that is when you integrate it with pipelines, the dashboards and reports on there are really rich, and it allows you to do that deep analytics. And because it's on Salesforce, very accessible for all, very user-friendly to see. And so that's one way that you can get that real-time feedback loops as part of your pipelines, and that integration is easy to set up. But it's more around how accessible those reports and dashboards are. I've seen in a lot of customers where actually a big issue, especially when sometimes when they're working through partners, a big issue is where you don't have visibility of those results, and that's what we're trying to address here.
Thank you very much. I hope that answers the question. I think something that you said earlier on, both of you, around the common challenges sort of spawned this question. So this was, how do you overcome common challenges teams face when scaling automated testing?
When you talk about scaling, there's two aspects. So one is the authoring part of it, and the other is the execution. For the authoring, as we mentioned, right, modularization of the test cases is extremely important. So if once you've built a good modular test case bed, any changes that happen to as part of a release cycle can easily be incorporated, and you can build a wholly new end-to-end test, end-to-end flow, but while still making very few changes to only a few, or adding only a few new test cases and then stringing them together, as I mentioned earlier. So modularization is important. It takes a little bit of upfront thinking, and it definitely needs to be maintained along the way. But it's a key to scaling. And again, involving the business. I cannot. It's a software aspect of this, but involving business users upfront is very important, because you do not want to automate the wrong test case and then have to find out that the defect it's reported is not correct. So that gets in the way of scaling up, of scaling your testing too. And then when it comes to execution, so that is about authoring. There's other aspects to authoring that I think Will could even cover. When it comes to execution, there are many techniques. Obviously, you want to run many of these test cases in parallel as far as possible, so that the test window is compressed. This can create its own challenges. We have used some tools. Provar itself offers some options there, but it's important to it's worth putting in the effort up front to put that structure in place, so that when you're executing with multiple users, and there are different strategies. You could execute the same test case with multiple different user profiles, so that you're testing out your permissions. You can execute sort of exclusive test cases in parallel, so that they don't step on each other. So we've used many of those techniques, so that there's some thought that needs to be put in. But the bottom line is that you do not want to execute test cases one after the other. You want, even if they are end-to-end scenarios, you want to try and identify which ones can be executed in parallel, and do that, and put and instrument it in such a way that you can actually achieve it. And then finally, one other aspect of this is creating multiple service accounts with the right permission profiles, so that you can actually execute different test cases in parallel.
Completely agree. Reusability, parallel execution, things that we discuss a lot and so important. But glad that you chose them. I've got a few others in mind. One of them being, the big challenge being maintaining your test suites and maintaining things. I've spoken to a lot of people who, for example, they're moving from the likes of Selenium or an open source framework. You can really remain static in your development of that quality framework if all you're doing is maintaining the tests. And here I could plug Provar in a big way, but another thing to think about is it's important to really just understand how the platform and the Salesforce orgs work, and what the different components are doing, and what they're kind of based on, because you can intelligently build tests so that they're going to be more resilient to those changes. And it can get quite technical there, but if you're doing it with a more traditional way, using XPaths, choosing the right the right kind of XPaths that don't have dynamic IDs, there are a lot of different best practices that you can use. But the overarching thing there is making sure that the tests that you're built are built to last, and so that you're not having to constantly maintain them. And then the other one I basically just talked about. Really, it's actually having the challenge is having a lack of visibility on what's happening in your testing and your QA activities. And we do see that a lot, where the testing is happening, but the teams don't really know to what extent and how successful it's been. So making sure you are thinking early about the reporting, you have the right reporting structures in place, the reporting is going to the right people as well. That's really important, and a massive and a huge way that you can start scaling and overcome those challenges.
I've got two more. This is from somebody who uses Salesforce and integrates Salesforce with another system, NetSuite. Would you use Provar to test both Salesforce and NetSuite, or would you recommend another tool?
This comes up a lot, and glad it's been asked. Obviously, at Provar, we really focus on Salesforce. We've covered a lot of reasons why. We've tried to tackle the most challenging aspect of test automation. However, it's really important that, all our customers and everyone else knows that we are an end-to-end testing solution. So we have all our customers will be using Provar to test not just Salesforce, but applications outside of that. And that goes across all of them. NetSuite is a big one that we see, but it could be anything, whether it's another web application, whether it's a front end, whether it's a website, a customer portal, whatever it might be. The end goal for a lot of teams that are building these tests is to build those end-to-end user journeys so that you can validate each and every customer or user interaction on those. And that does include inside and outside of Salesforce. It should be known we can also do back-end testing as well. But yes, is the answer. Quick answer to your question. We can absolutely test outside in other systems outside of Salesforce.
So this one's quite an interesting one because I don't really know the answer to this. So the question is how concretely to use generative AI to accelerate test data generation and scenario creation while this is entirely internal.
I can take a stab at that. So I mean, it's relevant for what we've been developing and kind of a part of our AI strategy at Provar. We've got generative AI embedded in our products, including Provar Manager. So one of the examples specific to the question is, one thing that you can do, and it's all about accelerating, how you can scale up the automation, automation approach and automation strategies. And one thing you can do with Provar Manager is import your Jira user stories, and based on some aspect of information within that user story, using some generative AI, it can scan that user story for the requirements, acceptance criteria, things like that. And just out of nowhere, it can develop 5 to 10 test cases. More than that, it just depends how much you want to choose. But we've got that inbuilt in our product so that teams can accelerate at that early stage of building out their testing. And the same goes for test data generation as well. We've got API drag and drop functionality in our automation solution that allows you to generate test data using AI. And so that's what you can then use to create, hundreds, thousands of records if that's part of the testing requirements that you've got. And overall, we're trying to input this the AI capabilities into our solutions in the way that's best catered to our customers, our clusters demands. The one that I really like most is being able to analyze reports and create root cause analysis report based on the analysis of the results, so that dev teams can then have a very easy to read reason why a test might be failing, components might be broken, whatever it is. But using AI, that's going to save teams and analysts or whoever might be generating those reports a load of time.
I'm going to do 2 more questions. One is from Krishnan to Will, and the other one is from someone anonymous, but I think it's more appropriate for Nachi. Nachi, which CI/CD tools would you recommend to use with Salesforce? I think Will's already said that Provar works with all of them. So I think this is a more appropriate question for you.
In the Salesforce context, I mean, just as far as the config management, release management process concerned, we have seen GearSet and Flosum used widely. So, and I believe Will, we've spoken earlier about this. So this Provar will support both of these, right? So short answer is Flosum or GearSet. There's other alternatives, but these are pretty industry standard.
And then, Will, the question from Krishnan, it says, Will, does Provar have visibility to the minor/major release roadmap of Salesforce and proactively help in preparing for those releases?
It's one of the big benefits, one that we talk about a lot, and it's one of the big differentiators, which we not only claim, but we know that is the case. So what we do is we align our releases to Salesforce releases, because as discussed kind of earlier in the presentation, huge challenges with the test automation framework. Those releases are undoubtedly going to cause a lot of your tests to break if you don't account for them, which just means a lot of work, a lot of maintenance, a lot of rework. And so what we do is we do a lot of analysis on each and every Salesforce release. We update our solution, and then we provide an update to our customers. And so we have countless examples of test cases failing straight after a release. But all they need to do rather than do the rework is just install our latest update, and then the tests are back to running successfully. So yeah, it's a huge time saver. At very minimum, you got the 3 major releases a year, and that's just the tip of the iceberg there. So yeah, definitely something that we support and will continue to do.
Okay, I have also got one more final question. Sorry, it's from Karen, and I think the question came in when we were talking about using generative AI to accelerate test data generation and scenario creation. And the question is, can we use ADO versus Jira for that? And also another way by not using Provar Manager.
We at Exavalu have developed some accelerators, basically to develop both the BDD test case, BDD scenarios from stories which may not have been written in that format, and then also to generate the test data. So in short, you prompt the LLM with the appropriately, you pipe the output, and we have some Python scripts that will then take the output, convert it into an Excel, and then use that to load. And then to optimize the prompting, there's some techniques that we use to make sure that you don't run out of limits for your prompts. So there's obviously ways that you can do this outside of Provar too, and particularly if you're using non-Provar tools that don't have these features which Will was talking about.
Thank you very much, everybody. Nachi, Will, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. And Amber, thank you so much for working on the chat and doing all the technical support and sending all the links and doing all of the things in the background. Amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you for being so interactive and so many questions.
Thank you, Ella.
Thanks, Ella. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.